Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton. Hello and welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups. We are going to be talking about relationships and sex education in relation to SEND learners today. So a really, really big topic.
It is a big topic and I'm really looking forward to getting into this topic with you. It's something that I've learned so much more about since you started your role working with us. But actually, before we got into that, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say it has been amazing that we've gone through all of the parts of the key stage curriculum. And it's been a really good opportunity to talk through all of those things. And sometimes it feels like we've said as much as we can maybe on those topics, but on a few bits, we just needed to put a little bit more into it. So we're going to be doing this episode on SEND. We're going to do an episode on exploitation. And then we are also going to do an episode on working with boys and young men.
Yeah.
There's so much more that we could do. And we would love to keep making podcast episodes for everybody if it was possible. So like our content, subscribe to our channels, follow us on Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform you use. And we'll just have one little shameless plug in there to say, if you like what we're doing and you feel like you've benefited from listening to the podcast so far, then please do let us know and then we can let other people know and they might let us make some more.
Yeah, and let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about. Absolutely. There might be loads of topics that we haven't covered that we haven't even thought about would make a good podcast episode. So let us know. Engage with us and the stuff we're putting out. You'll see lots of stuff on Instagram as well.
Absolutely. So let me find out a little bit more about how did you get into working with SEND learners?
Yeah.
And how did you kind of come about being in this role with us at Luton Sexual Health?
So I think I've mentioned before that I used to work for the sexual health charity Brooke, and prior to that, I'd sort of done an accreditation in relationships and sex education and just had a real passion for going into schools and teaching the RSE curriculum because it had just become compulsory and mandatory to be taught to young people. But whilst I was at Brooke, I got placed in a special school in Thurrock and was there pretty much every week. And I would do one-to-ones with their learners. And then that sort of grew to doing their Key Stage 3 learners, then their Key Stage 4. And then I was covering pretty much from Key Stage 3 up until sixth form, their post-16 site. And I was in there a lot and I just really loved it. I was actually really nervous going into doing those sessions beforehand because I hadn't actually had any experience of working with young people that had an additional need. Yeah. I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't actually even probably stepped foot in a special school. And instantly I loved it and all my nerves sort of went away because I found teaching those young people extremely rewarding. I had the best questions. I had the most fun. And I really felt like they were taking away stuff every week. Sometimes with mainstream learners, you're not sure who is taking it all in or you're concerned that some of the young people, I don't know, haven't had the best opportunity to learn in the way that they need to learn. Yep. Whereas in a special school, there is a lot of support for those young people and a real sense of community. And what I love is this teacher once said to me there, he said, look, everybody is going to engage with this in a different way, but they're all going to be respectful because they've all got their thing. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if somebody asks a question that might make them all laugh. It doesn't matter if someone is finding it tricky and needs to leave the room, things like that. They're all going to be really engaged no matter. They're all quite, it was just a lovely, accepting atmosphere. And so when the role came up at Luton Sexual Health, I was moving to the area. I thought, that's perfect. That's what I want to continue to do because, I just loved it. I loved being around those young people.
That is amazing. So you mentioned that the role came up at Luton Sexual Health and maybe I should just give a little bit of background to kind of where that came from. And so myself and some of our other colleagues had been working closely with some of the colleges in the area, Central Beds College and Barnfield College, and delivering some RSE education to their SEND learners who potentially, realistically, given the time, like you said, RSE becoming mandatory in around 2020, they hadn't received that RSE education in school, essentially. And we were potentially underprepared. So we went in to teach some of these sessions, and they were, like you said, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Really, really different learners that had different questions and different needs. One girl was just so over the moon to have learned where a baby came from. And basically every week when I came to visit, she would be like, now the baby comes out of the vagina, and tell me that like every single time, because we'd talked about like how babies are made and stuff like that she really wanted to learn because her sister was pregnant. But actually one of the things that we discovered from that is that there are a lot of SEND young people who have not had adequate RSE, and that there are sometimes presenting issues that come from that lack of education.
Yep.
And that we as a small team didn't really feel like we were equipped to meet that need. And also we didn't have there wasn't enough of us to meet that need. So we were very lucky to be able to go back to like commissioners and powers that be and explain essentially, we need somebody who's got some specialist knowledge and skills in this area, but that can also work with us on a really a really quite niche topic. And actually I interviewed you and I interviewed 2 other people on the same day that I interviewed you. And I think the thing that set your approach apart from others was the real understanding of the need to differentiate for SEND learners, but also for the fact that they were really entitled to really good relationships and sex education, and that was really important for them.
Yeah.
And like the standout reason for us for getting you involved in the role was your sort of grasp of the fact that people deserve that differentiation so that they can access it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate we've been talking about SEND learners, and parents of a SEND young person will know exactly what we mean and what we're talking about. But for anyone else, can you explain what we mean by SEND?
Yeah, so SEND stands for Special Educational Need and or Disability.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like a shorthand, I guess, for people to use like in schools and colleges and maybe in the workplace, and for parents, you know, to say, well, they have a SEND young person or some, you know, a carer looks after someone who has SEND. It's a bit of a funny word. It's useful, I think, for people to use like in a professional capacity, but describing somebody as SEND probably isn't appropriate. And lots of people that would come under the bracket of SEND wouldn't identify as being a SEND person.
Yeah.
So it's something that we use to describe, but I mean, we use a lot, we say additional need, or we call it what it is. So I guess there are lots of different things that might fit under SEND, like a neurodivergent young person, a person who has a learning disability, a person that just requires extra support, a person that has evolving needs as they grow older, maybe somebody who also has a disability and a life-limiting illness. Like there are lots of variations and lots of different people and lots of different needs. So that's why also, like, I guess as a little PSA, like, we're going to be talking about SEND learners, and we're going to try and distinguish and talk about individual needs as much as possible. But it's a massive topic. Yeah. So we're going to try and not generalize too much, and we'll try and pinpoint exactly who we're talking about and what sort of need we're talking about in the episode.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, our experience comes from a place of working with a lot of different young people and adults. And actually, I was thinking when you were talking then, we've actually had people who might have a traumatic brain injury or something like that, who then that presents as an additional need to access in our service. And realistically, what it comes down to is that we are working to develop equitable access to sexual health. And actually that means meeting people where they're at and making some adjustments and making some changes to ensure that people are getting the service they need.
Yeah, it's all person-centered, isn't it? So when we meet a class of young people and we've been told that they're SEND learners, you sort of can't go in with any preconceived ideas, or, you know, you just go in with what you have and then you adapt in the moment, which is probably maybe why teaching RSE to young people who have SEND feels a little bit daunting sometimes, because we know that there are varying levels of need that you have to adapt in the moment. I could plan a whole session, but like, for example, like you said, if you're going in to teach, you know, at college, some of them are between 16 and 25 at college. So that's a broad age range, but some of them you've been asked to go and teach about contraception, but some of them may not know the mechanics of what sex is and how a baby is made and how reproduction works. And then they start clicking, so is that why we have a period? And you have to like,
take it back.
And
actually, we've talked from the beginning when we were talking about Key Stage 1 curriculum as things being like ladder concepts. And you've got to get a grasp of those first rungs of the ladder, before you can move up and understand the bigger premise. And actually, that is often what we're doing with our SEND learners. Like, we can't talk about contraception until we've explained how a period works, a cycle, how a baby's made, and then the fact that people have sex to make babies. We've got to go through all those stages in order to say, and then sometimes people want to prevent that process. So it's quite alien. Tell us a little bit about some of the people you meet and the topics you cover. And
so I was just thinking when you were talking there, like we often go in, if we're doing sort of group sessions with learners, we'd maybe do a program of 4 weeks. So we do like 4 different topics. And I was just thinking like, it's just never enough. There's never enough time. Myself and our colleague Drew recently did some sessions with a girls group and a boys group. And we had 4 weeks and you just feel like there isn't enough time because you are covering like consent and healthy relationships and sexting and the law. But in between all of that, it's really nuanced because it's like consent and boundaries and consent with family and consent with, you know, everyday life, consent when it comes to sex, and then healthy relationships. What does a healthy relationship look like? What is a relationship? Like there are so many elements that, like you said, maybe those bottom rungs of the ladder have never been covered, of like just simple, what touch I like, what touch I don't like, who are the important people in my life, what boundaries are okay with those people. So then to be talking about a healthy relationship, you know, at 9 a.m. in the morning, let's imagine you're all in a romantic relationship and let's talk about what that would look like. They're like, wait, what? You know, it's quite, it can be like a little bit destabilizing for them. And I think when I speak to teachers or parents and they talk about maybe some of the concerns I've had is like how the people are going to react to that education or how they're going to react in those sessions, that they're not ready for it, or it's maybe a bit too complex or it's a bit too much. That to me is like, okay, well, it's because the basics haven't been covered. It's not because they're finding that too difficult to understand or difficult to learn about or uncomfortable to learn about. It's because they don't have all of those foundations, which we've talked about from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 4. Quite often, that's what I find anyway.
Do you find that parents, professionals, caregivers, that sort of thing, try and hold on to that element of control over what their young people learn as well?
Yeah, it's it's hard balance, isn't it? Because I hear the word vulnerable a lot. So on referrals and I get referrals for 8-year-olds who have autism to 54-year-olds who have Down syndrome or a learning disability. And I see the word and I hear the word, they're very vulnerable. They're vulnerable to exploitation, which we're going to talk about in a little while. They're vulnerable to harmful sexual behaviours that they don't understand and things like that. And I understand, I mean, I can't talk from a parent perspective, but you want to protect them. But I think sometimes the overprotection and not talking about things, not letting them explore, not letting them go to these lessons, not giving them the correct information at the right time in their life. Like I'm talking about like, you know, the right developmental age is sometimes putting them more at risk. And I see that because often I get referrals for my one-to-one program for adults. And these are adults maybe in their early 20s, mid-20s, who are out in the world now, exploring relationships, doing things that we all did as teenagers. But because they're now a young adult, people are like, oh my God, they're going to be taken advantage of and they're putting themselves at risk, you know, sending photos or talking to this person online. And actually it's like, well, no, we haven't done the work before. So now we have to fast forward. We've got to escalate quickly. We've got to fill it all in,
That is true though. And then you end up in a situation where you're trying to like quickly plug gaps and fill gaps to get somebody up to speed. Because of course, if you're 24, 25 and you have a learning disability, but also you are independent, you cook for yourself, you meet your own needs, you have support, your life's in place, it's quite normal to want human connection and human interaction. And it's quite normal to want sex or pleasure. And I think that the one thing that I've learned so much more about from working with you and the work we've done with our SEND learners is the fact that sometimes the barrier for them, correct me if I'm wrong, potentially, but sometimes the barrier is that people around them assume that they aren't capable of having a relationship. Or that they aren't responsible enough to have sex, or that they will just inherently be at risk. And then that leaves them kind of more at risk because they're trying to then not only still meet their own needs for love and connection and intimacy and pleasure, but they also are trying to hide it from the people that should be playing potentially a supportive role in that.
Yeah. And I think that, I would say from my experience as well, that is what I see quite often. And I think because of my role, I speak to a lot of parents, I speak to a lot of social workers, and I speak to a lot of people in, supported living placements who are somebody's full-time carer. And I think, yes, they may not understand everything, but there's a difference, isn't there, between understanding a topic or a concept and not having capacity. And I think that's why we have things like the mental capacity assessments, which I do meet clients who haven't met that threshold of having capacity when it comes to sex and relationships. And I might do work with them, but my job isn't to bring those people to capacity. My job is to just give them the information and help them understand. And some people may not ever reach capacity fully in terms of, an assessment, but that's not something I really concentrate on, because to assume incapacity is discrimination. And I'm not saying that we meet people all the time that, everyone thinks they don't have capacity, but we certainly meet people where everybody else has a say and that person has sort of lost their voice a little bit in being able to be like, no, this is what I want. And they want to be able to do it safely. They may just not know how. And I think that's just why it's so important to teach them RSE at school, at college. And I know that there are some fantastic schools here in Luton, for example, that do have a really robust RSE curriculum for their SEND learners. There are obviously going to be lots of challenges, which we'll talk about, but it's super important. Basically, just for like everybody else.
It is really important. Okay, so obviously learners of SEND are entitled to learn everything that is on the main RSE curriculum. There aren't different lessons that you need to teach people with SEND. It's potentially more about how you differentiate those lessons. However, what we do know is that there are some topics that come up maybe more frequently than others. And some of them come around sensory seeking, some of them come around not necessarily understanding boundaries, and some of them come around like online safety and things like that, just for a few that I could think of off the top of my head. When you get your one-to-one referrals, or potentially if you're talking to a parent of a SEND young person, what would you say are the the emerging themes, and what advice do you give on those sort of topics?
I would say probably one of the biggest themes is consensual touch and boundaries. So maybe somebody that is constantly touching other people, is hugging people for too long, is kissing people in sort of maybe deemed inappropriate ways, who maybe not lacks the understanding, but isn't always sure what appropriate touch is for different relationships that they have in their life. And it comes most of the time, from my experience of meeting these young people, from a loving place and seeking connection, like you said, and seeking that sensory feel of being touched and hugged and squeezed. And sometimes it comes from a place of, well, because that young person has been very loved affectionately and held on to, and somebody has always held their hand and someone's always had their arm around them. And quite often I meet people where that has been the case when they've then had a support worker or a carer. So then to talk to them about understanding boundaries with other people can become a bit muddled and a bit confused. So I am very and I talk to parents and the young people or the adult like asking for consent from that person and making it like a choice, and saying also, if that parent one day is not feeling that hug or that doesn't feel appropriate. Like I had a young person who had autism and ADHD, and they kept slapping their mum's bottom. So they would just go up behind her and give her a big whack on the bottom. And she said, I don't want to tell him off because I know he's not doing it in a nasty, malicious way. I said, no, but you have to set that boundary. You have to turn around and say, that's not appropriate. And I don't like it when you do that. And that makes me feel this way. And it's not okay for you to touch mum's bottom for X, Y, and Z reasons. And that's okay for you to do. She said, I know, but he's very little. And I said, yeah, but you have to do that now.
You have to do that now because the teacher is not going to be happy.
When they slap.
And we do have that. Yeah,
we do have that.
And we have had teachers who say that they struggle because of how touchy-feely some of their students can be. And actually, when you were speaking then, one of the things I was thinking is some of the young people that you work with are receive personal care.
Yeah.
And so somebody is literally being in their intimate parts of their body, changing them potentially or supporting them with washing or dressing, those kind of things. Yeah. And although it's necessary and required, has consent been modelled to them in those situations? So somebody is allowed to undress you and change you, but are they explaining it to you?
Are they asking you?
Yeah.
I was on a conference the other day for SEND and RSE, the Sex Education Forum, were talking about some sort of like case studies of really good examples of what RSE looks like in a SEND setting. And there was a teacher who worked with a young person who was in a wheelchair, who was nonverbal but could vocalize. And they were talking about how this young person communicates with facial expressions and vocalizing and eye movements. And this teacher was their main teacher, but would also help them go to the toilet.
Yeah.
And the young person would always become very distressed. And it wasn't until the teacher suddenly realized, oh, is it because, this is, I'm your full-time teacher and now I'm helping you go to the toilet. Like, is that what's making you feel like really uncomfortable? And apparently the relief on this young person's face, and they vocalized like, yes, that is how I feel. And then their whole attitude to going to the toilet changed. So it is like not assuming that young person is comfortable all the time with being like helped and supported, because like with all young people, if you're always up in their business and their personal space, they're going to be like, go away, leave me alone, I need some privacy, I need some time. And I think that leads me on quite nicely to
I knew when you said privacy and time, I was like, right, I know where we're going next.
The next big one, I get loads of parents mainly talking to me about, like, if I'm at an event or something, a parent will come over and be like, I've got a real issue because they won't stop masturbating, or they're masturbating in the living room, or they're humping things, humping chairs. They've started, humping a sibling, and they're not. And it comes from a place of like, quite often these are quite young people. So they're probably just about to go through puberty, I would say. So all of those feelings are happening, but also they may just be sensory seeking. We don't need to sexualize it right now. We just need to give them a place to do it. Maybe if they're doing it, I also get like, but when they are doing it, they don't stop. And we've had a conversation, and this can be really uncomfortable for parents to think about. But like, it may be that because they're not reaching the climax,
they're not finishing.
So, and that's hard to explain.
Yeah, it really is. And also parents don't want to think of their children as sexual beings. Yeah. And it's really hard to differentiate and draw the line between sensory seeking with a young person and sexual pleasure. Yeah. But the young person doesn't know that it has anything to do with sex necessarily. No. Yeah. We were saying before, there was a young person that was referred to you, and mum was really quite like frustrated and upset, and like she was very boundaried, and she would tell daughter to go into her bedroom and she needed to wash her hands and all of those really good boundaries were in place. But actually, she was just doing it for ages. And the mum was like, I don't understand. Like, why is she doing that for so long? And we were kind of trying to explain, like, if she doesn't really know how, and she's not getting herself to a place of feeling like relieved, like done, it's not going to go away. No, and I think the hard thing is that potentially as well, like, somebody may have made themselves climax at one point and experienced that, and then now the goal. They can't, but they know that's the goal. Yeah. So that is hard. Really difficult, and it's really awkward. Like, it is, because even if you've got children who are mainstream learners in school, whatever, children love to put their hands down their pants. Like children love to rub on things, even when they're really little, like 4 and 5 year olds on the arm of the sofa, like grinding backwards and forwards, things like that. And you're like, that's not appropriate. Or like, my thing's always just been, if you want to have your hands down your pants, do it in your bedroom, wash your hands afterwards, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, sometimes with some of the conversations that I've been involved in with you, parents are like, oh, so I'm allowed to just tell them like, no, stop. You're not allowed to do that in the living room. Yeah. You need to go to your bedroom. Yeah. Yes. You can put the boundaries in place. You're the adult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's that. And then there's also the element of like, what happens if stuff, like if we're talking about somebody who has a penis who's masturbating and then stuff comes out of that penis, parents are like, I don't know how, or, you know, how to explain that, or, you know, do I need to start talking about ejaculation and wet dreams? I'm like, yes, you do. Yeah. That is exactly what you need to do. And again, an uncomfortable conversation, again, throws up a myriad of things for people who may have sensory sensitivities or find that experience really uncomfortable. So I've sent lots of social stories. I've had parents who have made comic strips. So they've made like a comic strip of what happens, like a social story.
Can you just tell us what a social story is? Because I only learned about social stories through working with you.
Yeah. So a social story is like a little, I guess, a step-by-step to explain something happening. So let's say we're doing a social story on masturbation. You would start from the very beginning of like, what is masturbation? Masturbation in its simple sentences that may have an image next to it. Or I've seen people do it in like a grid type format. So you have an image and then a simple sentence or a couple of words underneath it. And it just takes you through the different stages of what masturbation would be, for example. So masturbation is something that people do because it makes them feel nice. It's when somebody touches their private parts. And then it might show an image, you know, a cartoon image or an easy on the eye image of what that looks like. I
have seen these images as well. They are just like a cartoon drawing. They're quite simplistic, but like the male one is just somebody literally holding their penis.
Yeah.
And then the female one is someone like laying on a bed with their hand.
With their hand on there. Yeah. And it talks about like hygiene. It talks about where it's appropriate. And also it's great about social stories because I guess when you're writing a social story, you have to sort of also mention like, but it's not okay if somebody was to ask you to do this in front of them, or it's not okay if somebody you don't know or an adult does it for you. So it's like a little manual, I guess.
It's not okay to take pictures or videos, those kind of things.
Exactly.
It really helps people as well, having that information presented to them in a way that works for them. And actually, social stories are really so useful as a tool with RSE and SEND. And I've seen some that are around periods and how to manage having your period and why it happens. But I've also seen some really good ones that are like, come into the clinic. Like you made one that was like, come in for a test. And it shows the person being invited to do their own swab. And this is like...
It's on our website, actually. If you go to Send Support, it's like I guess that's a bit like an easy read. Because a social story sort of takes the person who it's for out of the equation and sort of is like a if that makes sense. So it's like I'll link it actually in the bio of like an easy read or a social story guidelines, so that if you want to make your own for your children, then you can, because it's actually really simple and easy to do.
On the eye is a free resource that you use as well.
So it's like NHS, the Learning Disability Service made all of these resources. And it's not just for like relationships and sex ed stuff. No. There's like a whole range of images about eating food, going to the toilet, going on public transport, like everything you can think of, basically. You have to tick a special box to say that you want to view the images that show private parts, that you're comfortable seeing those pictures. Because they're just pictures of penises, boobs, bums.
Yeah, they're great.
But they're great because...
They're great, but every time we often use Canva to make presentations and things like this. And I know when Sophie's been busy working on her stories, because if you click the uploads files... It is just entirely like pictures of naked bodies, but in a cartoon format.
Yeah. And they have ones for like sex. Like they have like people they're in a bed and it's got like movement lines to show that people might be moving when they're having sex and like things like that, because that is another thing that I think comes up a lot is maybe when we talk to mainstream learners, we talk a lot about sex. Penis goes in a vagina, oral sex, mouth is around a genital or whatever.
Yeah.
Potentially, SEND learners don't get that. And I have had situations in SEND settings where, again, they think that it's in the best interest of the child, but I've started talking about what couples might do. And this was to 16-year-olds, maybe they were like year 10, year 11. What couples might do that's different to what friends might do. And I had a young person put their hand up and say they might lick each other's private parts. And I went, yeah, they might. That's called oral sex. And I talked about that, how that has to be consensual and yada, yada, yada. And I remember the teacher saying, no, they might hold hands. They would hold hands. And then I had another teacher, because I was then explaining about the age of consent, because some of those young people were 16. And the teacher said, I think this is a safeguarding. I don't think you should tell them what the age of consent is, because we don't want them to start having sex. They're not ready. And I think that's probably another challenge that we see is I understand where that comes from. And I hope it comes from a place of wanting to protect these young people and knowing that, yes, some of them might be slightly more vulnerable, but again, the law is the law. And then we do meet the flip side where people maybe don't understand that, they haven't been given that information, and they are doing things that are putting other people at risk, or they are getting themselves in trouble with the law because they haven't been told things, they haven't been told things in relation to their chronological age.
Yeah, and I think people get really caught up when we talk about RSE and SEND learners with maturational ages and chronological ages. But realistically, when you teach about sex and the law, there is no...
It's the same for everyone.
Yeah, it's the same for everyone. Yeah. There's no variation. It is literally, the law's the law.
Yeah.
And obviously consent and capacity bear some weight in that. But if a 16-year-old with an additional need is willingly entering into a sexual relationship, that's just as legal as any other 16-year-old having sex. Yeah. And that's sometimes a little bit of a tough pill to swallow as well for people. The other part of, and I'm thinking of meeting a young person with you for the first time, another part of this, I know where this is going, is about online safety.
Oh, yeah.
And so when Sophie was quite new in this role, I was like, I'm going to come with you and we'll go meet some of these learners together and we'll get used to some of these parts of it together. And we went and met a wonderful, amazing young girl at one of the local colleges. And when we first met her, what did she tell us?
Told us her full name, her address, exactly where she lived, and then gave us directions to
her
where
house,
it was.
her phone number, and her email address.
Yeah. And we were like, okay, let's start with personal information and what's private and what you say to people when you first meet them, because that just comes from not just stranger danger perspective, but if you're on a date with someone, or if you've started online dating, or if you started talking to someone online, because let's face it, that is how young people meet each other. Yeah. And that is how a lot of the time I find people who have an additional need, that is how they are forming some of their connections with people. It might be
not just relationships either, making friends.
Exactly. Yeah. And to say they can't do it, using the internet is bad, putting all these restrictions, especially for adults, because this person we met was a young adult. Yeah, she was over 18. It's not keeping them safe. They need to learn. It's what you said in the very beginning, road safety, internet safety.
Yeah, they need to be talked through it. They need to learn. And this girl who was 19, this woman who was 19, she had her own flat. She lived independently. She had support workers that came and visited in and out, but they didn't live with her. She didn't have 24-hour support. And she wanted a relationship. Yeah. And also she was really quite responsible. She just hadn't been given the right information. And actually we did about 6 sessions, I think, with her together. To the point where I was like, wow, this is just really good learning for me. I want to carry on coming to all these sessions. Yeah. And now when we go into college, she's an advocate for the importance of sexual health. She'll come over to our stand and she'll be telling other students. Yeah. And she knows
you need to get this. This is the implant.
And she knows about her implant. Yeah. And she wanted to have a relationship. Yeah. And actually now she feels empowered to be in charge of her contraception and her reproductive health. She knows how to get support and testing. And she knows what's appropriate and how to keep herself safe online. And it's I worry sometimes that when professionals call us in and say, can you come and, I don't know, like work with this young person? They think that we're going to tell them, this is bad, you can't do this, you can't go there, that's not safe.
Yeah.
And that's not what we do.
No.
We just want to give young people and adults the tools to be safe and to access the services they need. And actually, I think that's probably the most fractious part of some of this, because on one hand, you'll have a professional who, like, I don't know, I've had a young person with autism who was LGBT, who was particularly like full on were who they were. And the impression that I got was that the professionals wanted me to get them to tone it down a bit. And it's like, that's not going to happen. It's not my job. And if you think that's what I'm going to do, then we need to like reestablish these boundaries, because I just want to empower these people to have safe and happy sex and relationships.
I think that's why sometimes we work quite closely and we have quite a lot of crossover in our roles, because obviously you're our exploitation lead, and like in your experience and what the work we do now, like what are some of the links that you see between SEND learners and exploitation, and are there certain vulnerabilities that professionals need to look out for, or like, what's your experience of working with those particular young people? Yeah,
so I would say there's definitely, in my experience, some of the young people, predominantly girls, who have ADHD and autism, diagnosed or undiagnosed, who it's potentially in school maybe seen as like naughty behaviour, disruptive behaviour, are quite like thrill seeking, and they're quite looking for that, like the dopamine seeking, okay? So that can tend to occasionally let people end up in more risky situations. They might have less of an understanding of people taking advantage of them. So somebody with ADHD and autism might not have the same level of understanding of personal relationships, and they really take people at face value.
That is a great point, because I will let you carry on.
It's true.
Understanding like deceptive language and understanding maybe like controlling behavior, which is actually really difficult to spot if somebody is being nice and kind to you. And then maybe being like, you know, we've talked about love bombing. That can be really hard to distinguish and separate for anybody. So if somebody isn't always understanding of like, I don't know, a societal norm, or is thinking outside the box more, like it's really hard for them to maybe to spot that. Or
it's really hard. People struggle to spot people being disingenuous. So they just think, oh, this person's really kind to me, they've got my best interest at heart. And actually, unfortunately, that makes people with, particularly people with autism, quite easy to groom sometimes. So what we do see is online grooming, or it generally seems to happen online first. I don't know how people seem to pick out the most vulnerable people or the people with ADHD and autism. All I can gather is that people who want to groom young people cast their net out wide and see who responds to them. And sometimes those people that might be a little bit more adrenaline seeking or sensory seeking, or looking for connection, or looking for excitement, can potentially be the ones to respond. So that's one element of it. I'm not saying that every single young person who gets exploited has ADHD or autism. That isn't the case at all. What I'm saying is that in connection with other vulnerabilities that might go on in someone's life, those elements of maybe lack of understanding around people not being nice and seeking out that kind of extra excitement and connection creates a little bit of a perfect storm. I would say that then we also have like LGBT plus young people who have additional needs, and that creates like a whole different potential host of issues. Some young people who identify as LGBT and are SEND might be like palmed off by professionals, I would say.
Well, we see that.
We see that happen. We do see that happen. How can you possibly know you're trans? How can you possibly know you're gay? Quite dismissive of their identity, or they're not presented because potentially they're quite sheltered. They're not presented with the appropriate information because it's hard enough potentially to talk to a SEND learner about penis and vagina sex. And then who wants to have a conversation about anal and PrEP and HIV with someone with limited understanding. Like we do. We'll have the conversation. It's fine.
Yeah.
We promise.
Yeah.
But that is another issue. And those people potentially, again, might find themselves online looking for acceptance, connection, community. And because of vulnerability, like we've mentioned, and it doesn't matter whether someone has like a learning disability or a neurodivergence, all of those things can create a level of vulnerability that then when they're online, that does potentially make someone easier to exploit because there's that need. People don't validate who I am. And if somebody can feel that need for you, then that's quite dangerous because that puts that person in quite a position of power.
Yeah.
And that gives them, I can say, oh, I believe you. I know that you're, I don't know, I know that you're gay. I believe you. I want to have a relationship with you. I respect you as an adult. And all of these people, they don't understand. They just treat you like a baby. They always will. And it just creates a perfect storm. So I think that it's really important for us to be aware of the fact that regardless of any kind of additional need, neurodivergence, people are sexual beings.
Yes.
And
they have a right
and it's
to
like
be
an
sexual.
innate, like we eat, we drink, we move our bodies, we have sex.
We reproduce.
We reproduce. It's an innate human urge. And just because of other things at play, that innate urge doesn't go away.
Yeah. And there are lots of different ways that you can do that with learners. And yes, it may take a longer amount of time. And yes, they may not retain information from one session to the next, but that doesn't mean that they don't have capacity, they don't understand.
Or they have the right to be told it in the first place.
They just need it to be reinforced and maybe try it in a different way. We're going to create, we've said this and we haven't done it when we've been recording this episode, but we will.
It's in our diaries for next week.
Like we are going to create a Padlet of as many resources and things that we can that are from us at Luton Sexual Health, but also there are lots of resources that are free, that are out there. Like it's only getting better actually to work with SEND learners around this topic because it is a rising and growing need. And, you know, like I said, I was on a conference with it about it the other day because it's an identified need that schools are trying to work on. And I think parents and carers are also, you know, trying to be engaged with as much as possible because like, it's a conversation as with anything that needs to happen in schools, but at home.
So, Sophie.
Sophie.
What would be, before we finish up, your top tips for a parent, a caregiver, anyone in a supportive role in the life of a young person, as we love to say? What would be your top tips for those people to support their SEND young person and start those conversations around sex and relationships?
I would say I love a resource. I love a book. I love an easy read. I love a social story. I love making a game. Like how many board games now have I made about healthy relationships and consent?
I love them.
And boundaries. And like the possibilities are endless. Like I've just made those on my computer and printed them off and they have worked an absolute treat because I feel like when I'm doing those games with the young people that I meet, who may find it really difficult to sit still, who may find it really difficult to look me in the eye and have a conversation, who are constantly moving around the room and fidgeting or whatever it may be, whatever their learning need is. If we're playing a board game and we're throwing a dice and there's an aim to the board game, they are learning as we
invested,
go. And actually what I've found as well is just don't assume that they don't know because, and we've said this, and we're going to talk about it a lot when we come to our final episode, you maybe don't know how much a young person knows.
No.
And what I found is when I'm talking to them and I'm playing these games and I'm using all my activities and resources to make it fun and engaging and interesting, I'm finding out actually that they know a lot more than maybe I thought they did.
Yep. Or they know they have a snippet of knowledge without context.
Without context, yeah, absolutely. Like they've seen something on the internet and then they'll ask, so I saw this video on the internet where two people are kissing and then one person pushes them down on the bed. I'm like, great. I'm really glad you told me that because now we can have a conversation about what that is, who views that, why it's on the internet, etc. And like with anything, if they are asking questions or if they are talking to people online or if they are masturbating or if they are asking for private space, they are ready to do all those things.
Yeah.
They just need some support
and
boundaries. Yeah.
Amazing. I've got my own little top tip.
Go on.
So I think I would say that don't assume that just because your child has an additional need that you don't need to be having these conversations. With any other part of the curriculum, we've talked about how we're starting this young. We're talking about good friendships, healthy relationships, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, even if it feels irrelevant, model that consent and have those conversations with your young person from a young age. And don't wait until they're 16 and then try and teach them the entire thing because you think that it's ready and it's appropriate. Give yourself something to build off of.
And like, if they are struggling with it, that's okay. Like, you know, just quickly about, you know, periods, for example, we get lots of referrals for young people who are really struggling at the thought of managing a period. People are worried about how they're going to manage it. The sensory elements of a period are so intense. And I've heard parents go, oh, it's just, they find it too difficult. It's too much for them. Like, do a sensory activity, put tampons in water, play with it, let them feel them, touch them, like explore the products with them, draw diagrams about where the period comes from. Like,
tip water in period pants. And also look for alternatives. If your kid's got sensory issues, then there's other options. Pads and tampons don't cut it when you've got sensory issues. And go out and look for period pants and explore that with your child and find other alternatives. Like, there's a lot.
Amazing.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Was there anything else that you needed to add?
I don't think
so. We all good?
I think so.
Okay.
I hope so.
Fab. Right. I'm going to think of one question then to ask you that a young person with SEND has asked me before.
Okay.
And how do we answer this question? Because it's the first one that I always get asked. How are babies made, Sophie?
How are babies made?
And how would you answer that in the middle of a lesson with a load of SEND learners?
I would not even talk about, I wouldn't even go down there when a man and a woman, when a married couple, when people
when people who love each other.
No. I would say when a penis goes into a vagina, that is how a baby is made. And some people call that sex. And a penis releases a liquid, and if that liquid is released into the woman's vagina and that liquid has lots of little sperm in it and that sperm finds the woman's egg, then a baby could potentially be created.
Amazing.
I would just and I mean, again, I'd probably draw a diagram. I'd make it fun.
You'd definitely draw a diagram.
I did it the other day. I'm just thinking, like, I would talk about the liquid that comes out. I would talk about where the egg comes from in a woman's body.
And it's sciencey.
It would be, exactly. It's a science answer.
Yeah, it was a science question.
I don't need to say anything. I would probably mention consent. Perfect. I would maybe just say consensually, the penis goes into the woman's vagina.
Wonderful. Excellent. So we are very lucky to have 2 more episodes of RSE for grown-ups left to record. One about exploitation and one about raising boys and young men, which in the wake of adolescence being on Netflix and topics that have been having recently is something that we're really excited to get a bit more into with you. So thank you very much for joining us and goodbye. See you again soon.
Thank you.